One of the reflections that Pope Francis said in one of his homilies is that when we look at the cross, we see the Cathedra of Christ. And this impacted me because when I reflected upon this teaching of the Pope, I realized that when you look at the cross, right, namely a crucifix, when you see Christ hanging on the cross and you meditate what you see in it, you see many different things. You see lessons about the reality of the world. And so when everybody looks at the cross of Christ, everybody has a different approach. Everybody sees something different. But nevertheless, what you can see in the cross of Christ is very profound teachings. So two things that you see in the cross of Christ. When you look at the cross of Christ, you see the ultimate clash of good and evil, the ultimate battle, like between good and evil, because you see how the evil in man's heart has led man to raise his hand against God, to strike him, to kill him, to murder him. This God who has been all good, who has been all generous, who has given man all good things that man has ever had in his life, and yet man pays back God in the most evil of ways, which is by striking him and taking his life away according to the flesh. And so you see the perversion, you see the evil in man's heart, that man is unthankful with God, and he has done the greatest act of evil against God himself. And you also see in the cross the love of God for men, because Christ hanging on the cross, you see that Christ has overcome everything, that all the evil and the hatred in the world. So the world rejected Christ. The world falsely condemned Christ, falsely accused him, and falsely, led him to suffer a very horrible death, right? Death by crucifixion. And so Christ's experience every worldly dysfunction. Christ was betrayed, he was sold, he was spat on, he was beaten, he was taunted, insulted. Everything that you can know has evil, has bad. Christ confronted that in his passion, in his trial, in his way to the cross. But despite everything that Christ confronted, you see that Christ's love did not diminish. Christ's love did not perish. Christ didn't stop loving the fellow man that he made. And in the cross, you see that Christ says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do." Even after, being nailed to the cross, even after been given vinegar instead of water when he say, "I thirst." And so Christ prays for his enemies. Christ is true to the gospel that he preached, right? Christ says, pray for your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. Because if you are only good with those who are good to you, what reward is there? So, Christ preached love for thy enemies. And Christ did what he preached. And so he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So you see that Christ is true to the gospel that he preached. Christ was not just a teacher who taught good things like many people did and like many people do. But Christ also did what he taught. Christ also did what he said. And this shows that Christ is authentic to his word, right? When somebody is authentic in their word, one does what one says. And so you see that Christ did what he said, and therefore he is authentic in his word. So you see the love of God. You see the love of Christ in the cross, Christ crucified. And so this is the cathedra from where Christ teaches the world. Another point that I reflected upon this when Pope Francis says that the cross is the cathedra of Christ. If you look at religious leaders or leaders in general, when they teach about anything they want to teach, they sit down to teach. And so you see the Buddha sitting down, right? You see religious leaders sitting down and teaching, the way of goodness or the way of enlightenment to human beings. But Christ is different in the way he teaches, right? Because the ultimate teaching of Christ's love is in the cross. That is when Christ showed his ultimate love for mankind. Because greater love has no one than the one who gives his life for his friend. And that's what Christ taught us. There is no greater love for a man to give his life for his friends. And so Christ in the cross is giving up his life. He is showing the greatest love that there can possibly be. And so from the cross, Christ is teaching what he preached. He is showing what he taught in a visible way, in the most real and physical and tangible way. So you see, the cross has the teaching chair of Christ, cathedral, right? The Cathedra of Christ. Cathedra means a chair. The chair from where, for example, the bishop teaches, right? The cross is the Cathedra of Christ. The cross is the place where you see the fullness of evil, the malice in man's heart, but you also see the goodness, the absolute goodness in God's heart. So you see both hearts come into play in the cross. You see man's heart and you see God's heart in the cross. You see the evil in man's heart, but you also see the perfection and the goodness of God's heart in the cross. This is why the cross is a very powerful symbol. And this is why the teaching of Pope Francis, that the cross is the cathedra of Christ, is very impactful for those who reflect upon it. And it has been for me. And this is one of the most important lessons that I have gotten from His Holiness. Thank you so much.